Hello, welcome back, guys. This is History Today. I'm your host, Martin Peralta, and today we're going to be talking about pyramids of the Nile. We'll be back right after this short commercial break. Welcome back, guys. Today's topic, we'll be talking about pyramids of the Nile. For this topic, we will need to know these vocab words. Narmer, a king of Upper Egypt who united Upper and Lower Egypt. A pharaoh, Egyptian ruler thought of as a god. Pyramid, resting place for Egyptian kings after death. And mummification, process by which a body is preserved after death. And lastly, we have hieroglyphics, the Egyptian writing system. Egypt is a civilization that rose along the banks of the Nile River of East Africa. Even though the Nile River would flood every year, the Egyptians still managed to stay there because every time the Nile River would flood, it would leave rich soil. Wow, imagine if we lived in a time period where every year our food and crops would get washed away by a flood. Yes, even though their crops and food would get washed away, it would benefit them because they would leave rich soil for them to grow new food. After a while, the flooding became normal to them, and they figured out when they can plant their foods, and started building their new way of life and culture. And the people of the Nile worshipped the Nile River as if it was a living god. But for a long time, Egypt was divided into two kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. The upper part of Egypt was located from the Nile's first rapids to the delta, which is one of our key words for this topic. But one day, the king of Upper Egypt, known as Narmer, decided he wanted to unite the two kingdoms, in which he did. After a while, Narmer went from a king to a pharaoh, which meant that people saw him as a king and also as a god figure. Pharaohs believed in many things, and one was that they thought they would rule the land after their death. So these kings built themselves magnificent tombs. The tombs were huge pyramids made out of massive limestone blocks. The people also thought that the people that had sinned would be eaten by a beast, and the good-hearted people would move on to another world. And they believed in this so much that the Egyptians preserved a dead person's body by mummification, which kept the body from decaying. And the Egyptians preserved their bodies so good that archaeologists now are finding their bodies in tombs with flesh still attached to their bones. Everything was good in Egypt until a group of Asians called the Hyksos arrived in horse-drawn chariots to invade the Egyptians' land. The Egyptians had a very important milestone in which they developed a new way of writing. The Egyptians' writing system is called hieroglyphics. Pictures stood for sounds or ideas. The pictures could be put together to make words and sentences. The Egyptians had a very organized society. At the top of the chain was the pharaoh and his family. Below them were the people of wealth who owned large amounts of land, the priests and the members of the government and army. Then came the middle class, merchants, people who worked in crafts. At the bottom were peasants. In later times, the Egyptians had slaves. People could move from one rank of society to another. And those who could read and write held important positions. Those were the ones that made their language and their writing system. Wrapping up our podcast, I think Egypt's biggest accomplishment was the pyramids, because now it's one of the world's most attractive tourist sites in all of the world. Depending on the size of the pyramid, it was based off of how much power the king had. If you see a really big pyramid, it's most likely that the king was a pharaoh, and a lot of people followed him. And if you see a smaller one, it means that he was the king, but it doesn't mean that he was a good one, and not for a long period of time, and did not have that much power. In the end, the pyramids on the Nile is a very important time in history and changed their lives. Hope you guys come back for our next podcast.